Good evening. On behalf of the Hutchinson Public Library, I want to welcome you to tonight's Meet the Authors program with Patty Wetterling and Joy Baker. Patty Wetterling is a national advocate, visionary, and educator on the prevention of child abduction and exploitation. Through her work and advocacy, Patty is known throughout the nation. She has received numerous awards for her tireless work and was named one of the 100 most influential Minnesotans of the century by the Minneapolis Star-Tribune in 1999. Joy Baker is the writer, blogger, and investigative journalist who uncovered key evidence in Jacob's case. She holds a journalism degree from the University of Minnesota and is an independent marketing consultant, professional copywriter, and writing coach. Her work on Jacob's case has been featured across media formats, including true crime podcasts. And I have to say, you probably didn't need those introductions, but I had to share it anyway. So thank you for listening. Thank you. There are a few people living in Minnesota who have not been touched by Jacob Wetterling's story. Since the publication of Dear Jacob, A Mother's Journey of Hope, Patty and Joy have been incredibly busy speaking to audiences. And I cannot tell you how very honored we are to have both of them here tonight speaking in Hutchinson. This is just incredible, and this audience of you all coming out tonight is just incredible. Thank you in advance.
This has been a journey, and I was just a regular mom. I was a stay-at-home mom. I was lucky. After Jerry finished chiropractic college, we bought a home in St. Joseph, and we lived above the office. This is me with our kids. Amy's in the middle. She was our oldest, and Jacob is in the blue shirt next to Jerry. Trevor is the little guy in the red pants, and when Amy was in kindergarten, we had to bring Carmen, the baby, for show and tell. They were close in age, and we were so young, and we lived above his office for 7.5 years to pay off student loans. But it was fun. St. Joe's a really small town. I grew up in St. Paul, so moving to that smaller community was lovely and refreshing. That was the year before. One of the measurables in my family, this family, is everybody waits to the point where they're taller than mom. So you can see Jacob with the summer before was just about there. The following year, he was straight across from me. Now, my grandson Finn, who's 10, is the only one shorter than me left. So, a lot of people remind me that they think of Jacob as the boy in the yellow sweater, and that was because on that horrific night when he was kidnapped a half a mile from our house, we were at a friend's house, and we had asked Jacob if he minded babysitting. He was in 6th grade. 11 sounds very young to me today, but at that point in time, he was very responsible, and the kids were going to just stay at home while we went to this post-festival assessment. What went right with our Millstream Arts Festival, and what did we need to improve for the next year, and it was just for a few hours. And so he asked if his friend Aaron could come over, and we ordered a pizza, left, and shortly after they called and asked to go to ride their bikes to the store. This is pre-Netflix. You actually had to go to the store and get the video. I said no when it was starting to get dark, and Trevor said, well, let me talk to Dad. So, I jokingly said, your son would like to speak with you. And it's like, look, Dad, we got a white sweatshirt on Aaron. Jacob's wearing your jogging vest. I got the flashlight. We'll go straight to the store and come straight back. And then they called again, and they said that Carmen doesn't want to go with. Is it okay if Rochelle comes over? She's 13-year-old next door, and babysits while we go to the store. And these are responsible kids. This is the 3rd time we talked to our kids since we left that day. But on the way back from the store, they were confronted by this masked gunman who let 2 of the boys go and kept Jacob. So when the police arrive at your house, it's like, do you have any pictures of your son? And I tearfully took the yellow sweater picture off the wall. That was actually his 5th grade picture. The one in the black shirt, he had picked that shirt out when we went back to school shopping, and that was his newest favorite. And You can see the difference in his development, but that was taken 10 days before he was kidnapped, so we didn't have that picture back yet. So, Jacob's story, it's just so rare, the way he was kidnapped in this small town with witnesses. So often a child is missing and they just sort of vanish. But the way it was so sensational, and it captured the news everywhere, and with that it brought tremendous fear. We've talked to so many people on the road who, I met a woman the other day who was nursing her firstborn child. Well, how do you think that Jacob's abduction, how do you think it affected her parenting going forward? There was a tremendous amount of terror. So some of what we were doing after we got our heads on straight was to try and take away some of the fear, because it just doesn't happen very often. But it went, because of the response of St. Joseph community and the state at large, we drew a lot of attention, national attention, and very quickly we did that line of people for like 5 miles, just holding hands, reaching out for Jacob. And the New York Times, USA Today, the Milwaukee Journal was here a lot. And it drew a lot of attention, and I don't know why every child doesn't get that much attention, but we were lucky in that we did, because I was told by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, that the number one way kids come home is when somebody recognizes their picture and they call the police. So we tried in every way possible to get his story out, and it drew a lot of national attention, which then initiated some of my leader work.
So I was 22 years old, just out of college, when Jacob was kidnapped. I'm from Brooklyn Center, went to school at the U in the Twin Cities, and when you're that age, you're really not paying attention to the news. And I did, though. I mean, everybody in this room, I'm sure, was absolutely horrified and glued to the news to find out what would happen with Jacob. And we all kind of assumed that he would be found. And I think we were all trying to do our best, looking for whatever they needed us to look for at the time. And it really amazed me, I think, how much the story was not only in our local newspapers and on our local stations, but also just, how is Patty? I think we were also worried about Patty and her kids and Jerry and the family, and how are they doing? And it was just, it just was heart-wrenching. And so I was pretty amazed that, and I have a video to show, because this is just 4 months later. So this is on Jacob's 12th birthday. I think this kind of shows a little bit what the state was going through, and then also I'll have Patty talk a little bit about the ending. There's no sound. Oh, shoot. If maybe the volume is, you might need to turn the volume. It might be muted. You hold the function key and unmute it. Maybe that's the problem. Sorry. No, wasn't. That's okay. We can get by without sound. But what I wanted to show in this video, and what I wanted Patty to talk about, is only 4 months later, as they're still really in survival mode, on Jacob's 12th birthday. Is it going to work? No, it doesn't sound good. Shoot, we had it worked in earlier too. Anyway, go ahead. Maybe just play it without the sound so you can at least see the visuals. Do you want to talk a little bit about what this was, Patty?
We just were blessed with so many people. Somebody knit those Jacob's Hope hats, and the reporters, a lot of people are so threatened by the media, but they were very kind to us. and every night they gave updates, which I think everybody needed. I've not seen this video in a while. Joy and I never give the same talk twice.
So what this is showing is they wanted to do something to recognize Jacob on his 12th birthday. So they had a balloon launch at Easton Park in St. Cloud. So this is right on Lake George. And people came together to do this balloon launch. But the other main thing that happened on that date was this was the day that Patty and Jerry announced that they were starting the Jacob Wetterling Foundation. And
we had a man from California, David Collins, come. His son Kevin had been missing for years, and he would go around the country and help people who had a missing child. So he came and he kept talking about you can't continue the effort without forming some kind of an organization. And I was really the least interested in doing that. I just wanted to find Jacob, but we couldn't. You can't raise money for just one child. You have to really have a plan to circulate information and other flyers. And we had a lot of corporate support from people in the Twin Cities who helped launch it on Jacob's birthday. And the good news about that is it did give us an opportunity to show some of the other missing kids in Minnesota. I didn't know there were many, and we got their stories out there again as well.
Jason, one more thing. Maybe because we put that audio cable in, usually the HDMI plays both the video and the audio. So maybe we can, there's one more video later, so we'll see. No, sorry. We'll go to the next one.
Okay, we can just talk about it at the end.
I think I'm trying to go to the next one, and there we go. Sorry.
So I asked law enforcement, what would help? What did you need? What would help you find missing kids faster? And they said two things. I said a central repository of information, one database where all the information across the state went into one system, and we didn't have that in 1989. They were working on it. And the second thing was, he said, sex offender registration. It would have helped to know who was in the area who have committed these crimes before. So we worked really closely with our state legislature and passed sex offender registry. There were only 6 states that had it at that point in time. And, you know, I knew nothing about missing children, but you become thirsty to just anything. I learned so much, and I studied their laws, and I met with state legislators, and we passed it in 1991, I believe. And then people were calling the National Center for Missing Children and asking which states don't have sex offender registry. My boyfriend's getting out of prison and trying to decide where he should live, and I thought, oh, we can fix that. So Jim Ramstad and Dave Durenberger were 2 incredibly helpful people, and that was my mom with Jerry and I when we went out to D.C. It was 1994 when President Clinton signed the Jacob Wetterling Act into law, which was an amazing experience. I was out there, this is actually kind of an embarrassing story. I was out in D.C. for a National Center board meeting. The chair of the board was a pediatrician from Mayo Clinic, and shortly after, you know, he saw what we were doing with our prevention messages and our response to Jacob's kidnapping, and he invited Jerry and I to D.C., and he invited me to join the board. So I was out there for a board meeting, and this is years later, at least 2 years later, and 96. President Clinton was doing a radio address. He did those every Friday night, and I was invited to listen to his radio address. He was going to be talking about networking of these sex offender registries across the country. So I changed my flight, and I went back and was at the White House, and he's notoriously late. So I finally found a Secret Service guy. They're really easy to identify. They have that ear thing. And I said, I'm sorry, I cannot stay. I have a flight to catch. And he said, well, just a minute. And he left. And shortly after, he came back and said, the president would like to talk to you before you leave. Follow me. So I followed him, and suddenly we're in the Oval Office. I'm in the Oval Office. He opened the door, and I'm all by myself in this amazing, it really is oval. There are 2 couches, kind of like love seats, smaller couches, and was I supposed to sit down? I was looking out the windows. You could see little John when President Kennedy was president. My imagination was going crazy, but I didn't know what to do. And suddenly President Clinton walks in the room. No Secret Service, it was just the 2 of us. And I had the opportunity to talk to the President of the United States. And so I was ready, and I just burst out with, I'm so sorry, President Clinton, I can't stay. My daughter has a soccer game. He laughed. Carmen later said, Mom, it was preseason. It's like, I don't care. I was not going to miss my kid's soccer game. We chatted for a while, and then they took a picture, and I was ready to leave, and one more chance to say something really meaningful. And I started walking out, and I turned around and said, I'll be back. We're not done. And he was very kind, and he did. He was one of those people who knew our story, and he was there. I got to meet him on several occasions. President Bush, later I got to meet, he hosted the first ever White House conference on missing children. That was pretty awesome.
So my question is, Patty, how did you go from being, maybe talking in auditoriums like this or in church basements to suddenly talking to President Clinton in the Oval Office? You started telling the story about David Collins.
David Collins, he'd been searching for many, many years, and he said to set up a foundation. So we did that, and we had a board of directors. One of the members of our board, Jim, is here. There you go, thank you. 25 years ago, he was on our board for the Jacob Wetterling Foundation. It's awesome. Jerry was really the one most active with the board. I was driven. I just kept asking questions. What next? What has to happen next? And I would just go with the next opportunity. And along the way, David Collins got us set up, and our foundation grew in helping other families, and then doing outreach for kids, trying to take away the fear. I'm just going to say this because it's a whole nother lecture, but scared kids are not safer. And so that fear of stranger danger was so prevalent, and it's typically not a stranger who takes a child, and it's better to give our kids information and empower them so they know what to do with different situations and not be scared. My phrase was smart, not scared. It's important to give them, it's what you won't talk about that scares kids the most. So I was talking to everybody. And there were revisions along the way to our Sex Offender Registry Act.
We run into so many kids, especially, who remember seeing Patty for the first time come to their gymnasium or their school cafeteria and talk about, what makes safe for kids and how to stay safe. And she was doing all of that. And then we were all fascinated by her and her ability and her strength to be able to get up in front of an audience and make changes. And we want to talk about this.
Yeah, this is Ed Smart, Elizabeth Smart's dad. My friend Colleen and I, her daughter's missing from Arkansas. And we were meeting with Ed and Lois Smart while she was missing, and I think this was before she came home. And that's Linda Walker, Drew Shadeen's mom. So what we did, we set up a support system for parents. It's not like you can call your neighbor and it's like, how do you get through the holidays? What do you do on Jacob's birthday? What do you do? How do you raise your other siblings? How do you deal with the media? How do you keep law enforcement involved? So we set up what was called Team Hope, where it's help offering parents empowerment, and we could talk to one another. And at that point in time, we pulled together 22 family members from around the country, and we formed this organization. And at this point, they have assisted over 110,000 people. it's missing and exploited, and it was definitely a need. That's what I kept discovering along the way, was there was a need for this or that. And my friend Colleen said, we need a handbook. How do you get through this? We need some, just a survival guide. So then we talked to the person at the Justice Department and created a family survival guide, which we just revised for about the 7th time. Over time, things change. So as we discovered things, I found people in Washington who were willing and eager to make things happen.
So in 2004 and 2006, you ran for Congress.
Yeah.
How'd that go?
That's another night. No, what I loved about running, I wanted to be a child advocate in Washington. I'd worked on federal law, I'd had federal, grants and set up some federal programs. Most of my work was on a federal level, and I got knocked down for having no experience, which I thought was pretty funny. But the best part about it was the youth who come to help you when you run for office. They believe in you, and they'll do anything to try and help you and help you meet people and study the issues. I learned so much along the way. It's a tough thing to do, though. The ads were Osama bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, and me. And I'm like, I'm really not a terrorist. I wrote one time, I was journaling, and in my journal it started off with, I played with Barbie dolls today, I'm not a terrorist, really. But it's a tough world, and I believe in democracy. I guess I was more liberal than the 6th district, but I ran twice, and I didn't get to be a child advocate in Washington on that level, but I stayed as a child advocate doing a lot of work in Washington.
So in 2009, it was the 20th anniversary of Jacob's abduction. And 20 years, I remember that hit me hard. By this time, I was living now out in New London, Minnesota. After graduation, I tried really hard to get my dream job downtown Minneapolis at a big ad agency, and I was not successful. So my friend, my college roommate, invited me out to Spicer for the summer. So she told me we could water ski on Green Lake on our lunch breaks, and I said, that sounds great, I'll be there by Friday. And so that's how I ended up in Spicer. And we started working really well together and decided to go into business together, and for the next 20 years, that's what I did. I was a co-owner in a small advertising agency in Wilmer, and in 2010, we celebrated our 20-year anniversary. And I thought, gosh, what a huge milestone, and gosh, I certainly can't do this for another 20 years. I was really burned out. I knew very much that I wanted to be a writer. I just could not, for the life of me, figure out how to get there. So I did something then in 2010. I started this little blog, and it was called Joy the Curious. And I originally started it in March of 2010. I was on vacation at the time in Florida, and it had nothing to do, my first story had nothing to do with Jacob. It had to do with an old rundown beach house on Longboat Key in Florida, and we'd been going there every year, and there was always this one kind of decrepit looking house in the middle of all these giant mansions, and I kept thinking, what is the story with this house? And so I looked into it. And it was fascinating, and it took me down all kinds of twists and turns. And this little ramshackle beach house, I found out, was owned by the owners of Tropicana, and it involved prohibition and, the Gambino brothers, and it just turned into an entire huge epic of a tale. And when it started to wind down, I remember thinking, well, now what am I going to write about? And I Googled Minnesota mysteries or something like that, and Jacob's story came up. And I hadn't really been paying attention to Jacob's story much. It had just been the 20-year anniversary a year earlier. I knew that, but then kind of out of nowhere, there was this story of this big breaking news story about this person of interest had been named in the case. And he was a neighbor of the Wetterlings, and his name was Dan Rassier. And he was the son of the couple who lived on the farm right there where the boys were confronted by this masked gunman. And so it was at the end of their driveway, Dan was young 40s at the time. His parents happened to be in Europe on a vacation, so he didn't really have a good alibi for that evening. And the other thing that had happened was a witness had come forward in 2003 and said that it was his tire tracks that had been left in Dan Rassier's driveway. And so they suddenly were looking at Dan Rassier all of a sudden now because these tire tracks had been accounted for. And so I came along and thought, well, I'm gonna look into this. I'm gonna write about this. And so I did. And I wrote about it for about 3 weeks, and I did a deep dive, and I went to the library, and I did a lot of search on the old microfilm reader and things like that. And then I put it away. I wrote for it for 3 weeks, and then I got a little freaked out and thought, you know what? New London's not really that far from St. Joseph. I have 2 young teenage boys of my own at this time, 13 and 15, and I thought, this is kind of dumb. I better move on. So I did. And so I did that. And then in 2013, I was contacted by none other than Dan Rassier, the person of interest. He reached out to me and said, I see you've been writing about me on your blog, and I'm wondering if you want to hear my side of the story. And I absolutely did not want to hear his side of the story. I was terrified. And I did agree to meet with him, and so we met at the St. Cloud Library. He told me his side of the story. And I was pretty convinced at that point that he didn't have anything to do with it. So I started again. This is the only reason that I started even writing about Jacob's story again, because I was contacted by the person of interest in the case, and I thought, well, I'll just try to help the guy out. He very much wanted me to get a hold of that guy who had left the tire tracks in his driveway and admitted to it. So I did. I put those 2 guys together, and we met at Panera Bread. Kevin and Dan and me and some coffee, and that is about the time I met Patty Wetterling for the first time.
So at this point I was chair of the board for the National Center, and I also got to, because of that, I got to travel, and I was on the International Center board, which was really amazing that kids are taken to other countries, and the journey of trying to get them back was phenomenal. It was interesting because Jerry went with me on those trips to like Amsterdam and Greece. He didn't go with me when I went to Iowa and Idaho. But he did follow me out there. And they meet once a year in Europe and then once in DC. So I was in DC for the International Center board meeting, and I had promised the director of this, it was a sexual assault center, right? And they were having a gala in Wilmer that night that I got home, so I thought I had plenty of time, and I got to the airport and drove quickly to Wilmer and changed in the bathroom to put on some gala clothing and had a presentation to make, and I was just getting ready to leave, putting on my coat, when this very tall woman came and introduced herself.
And by that time, after my 20 years of working with my business partner, I had decided to throw caution to the wind and figure out how to be a writer. So I took a year off. I sold my half of the business to my friend Betsy, and that's about a year later, my husband, bless his heart, said, Joy, I don't think the writing thing's working out. I do think you need to go back to work. And so I did. I accepted a job at Rice Memorial Hospital as their marketing manager, and that's what I was doing. We both happened to be at this charity gala, me for work and Patty because she was the keynote speaker. And I sat and I listened to her, and she was fascinating as always. And I just thought, gosh, I wonder if she knows about my blog or if she's been paying attention to that. And so after she finished, she kind of left, and my husband said, well, go introduce yourself. So I did. I kind of followed her out to the lobby, and I caught her while she was putting her coat on, and I just said, hi, I'm Joy Baker. I don't know if you've heard about me, but I have this blog, and I've been writing about Jacob's case, and yeah, I was totally nervous, and she was very gracious.
Yeah, she handed me her card and it said Joy the Curious, which got my curiosity going, because she also had said she worked for the hospital, and I was exhausted. I took the card and I thanked her and I drove home and I handed Jerry the card and said, I met this lady, she's written about Jacob. I have to tell you, I'd worked with all kinds of media, but in 20, what year is that? 13, I'd never read a blog. It was not my functional world. And so I handed the card to Jerry, I went to bed and in the morning, I got up and he said, wow, you should read this. And he began reading Joy's blog as I was pacing around the house. It's like, who is this woman? And I thought, nobody can tell our story. I was thinking I was going to write a book. I was collecting things, but because I was traveling and working, I really was disorganized. And who is she?
So we did have a long phone conversation that was a little awkward and uncomfortable, but Patty was very gracious. I think Jerry did most of the talking, to be quite honest, that first phone call, but we just sort of, said niceties to each other. And then I just said, well, I'm going to just keep going here if that's all right. And I don't think she said no. She didn't exactly say yes, but I just kept going. And the one person that I really wanted to get a hold of, at this point I had made a conscious decision to only talk to people who had a direct connection to the case. So I was talking to the neighbors and witnesses, former law enforcement, if they would be willing. And there was one young man by the name of Jared Shirel, and he was from Cold Spring. And in January of 1989, so just 9 months prior to Jacob's abduction, Jared had been abducted while walking home from a cafe in Cold Spring, Minnesota, which is only about 10 miles from St. Joseph. And I'd never heard of this story before. So I thought, well, with a little genealogy research, maybe I can find this kid. And so I did. Turns out Jared had moved from Cold Spring to Paynesville, Minnesota. Not long after his abduction, his family just thought for his own mental health and well-being, they were going to move out of that town and move back to where they were from originally. So Jared was living in Paynesville, Minnesota. He and I, ironically, had a mutual friend on Facebook. So I reached out to him on Facebook and just said, hey, Jared, here's what I'm doing. Here's my blog. And would you be willing to share your story with me? And he did. He said, sure. He was very kind, very open, very gracious with his time and trusting. Came to my house and he shared just a whopper of a story. And so we decided we were gonna share his story on my blog. And then he said to me before the end of the evening, but there's one thing I really would love to do. I really want to talk to Trevor Wetterling and Aaron Larson. Trevor is Jacob's younger brother, and Aaron Larson was Jacob's best friend that were with them on the night that he was kidnapped. He said, do you think that you could get a hold of Patty and arrange that for me? And I said, I'll try, sure, why not? So I emailed Patty and explained that I had met with Jared and what a nice guy, and what do you think, Patty? Would this be okay if we put these three boys together and let them compare notes?
And I said, no way. I didn't understand. I was really protective of Jared. We'd met him earlier, and his telling his story is a very brave thing to do, and I was worried about aftermath of that, because a lot of people, can come up to you, and it was a very personal story. And Trevor, this is years later, was healing. He was... he had the trauma of witnessing his brother's abduction, and I didn't see the wisdom in meeting with Jared and Aaron together. It just didn't make sense to me, and I just began to question, who is this woman? I'd worked with law enforcement, and here she was talking to main suspects, a person of interest, neighbors, police, everybody that surrounded us, and I think I confronted her and said, it feels like you're stalking us. What if I did that to you? If I talked to your coworkers, your neighbors, your friends of friends, and it's like, it just felt, I was scared. I was afraid she was going to mess up the investigation because she wasn't a cop, and I called her a stalker.
And I was devastated. I felt horrible because that was really the first time I kind of stepped outside of myself and looked at my whole self and thought, my gosh, am I really a stalker? Is this what stalkers do? And so I just, at that point, I was like, you know what, I'm done. If I am somehow bringing more harm to this family and this woman who I admire so much, if I'm somehow putting her through more trauma, that was the last thing that I wanted to do. I would just, a mom helping another mom. So I had decided at that point to just hang it up, walk away. But Jared would not let it go. And he's like, nope, you're in. You're all in. We're all in. So he wanted me to share his story on his blog, and we did. And the other thing that he wanted to do was to find a picture of this guy. He was an early suspect in the case. He knew his name, but he'd never seen a photo of him. His name was Dwayne Hart, and he was a known pedophile in the Painesville area. And so he wanted to see a photo of this guy, so I started going through the Painesville Press, and they had an amazing online archive at the time, so I was really lucky to even be able to do this. And I came across this story about these 5 young teenage boys, and this is in May of 1987. So this is coming from the police department in Painesville, and they were sending out a request for people to be on the lookout for this guy who is jumping out of the bushes, wearing all black, threatening kids, assaulting them, taking trophies from them, cutting off chunks of their hair. I mean, it was really frightening, really horrifying. These parents had all filed police reports, but the kids were terrified. This was happening usually after the curfew rang, and the kids were on their way home after the 9 o'clock whistle, having been at the arcade or the local pizza place. They started calling him Chester the Molester, kind of half joking about it, but they were really scared. So I asked Jared about this, and I said, have you ever heard of these cases before? And he said, no, I have not heard of those. And he said, can you please send that article straight up to the Stearns County Sheriff's Department? And gave me the name of the lead investigator on the case, so I did that. And she said, yes, please send me the information. She had never heard of the cases before. And so we asked Patty and Jerry if they had heard of the cases before.
No, we hadn't. This is 2 years prior to Jared or Jacob being kidnapped that these cases happened. And by the way, Painesville still is in Stearns County, so it was confusing. But remember that database that they didn't have? There was no one place for everybody to see what was going on in the neighboring county or city. So yeah. So I finally realized that Joy was asking questions and uncovering things that nobody had done before. And yeah, she mapped out where each assault happened, and there were more than the 6 in the article.
Yeah, so Jared had asked me, he said, you know what, don't blog about this. It seemed really important to us, but he said, I want to make sure, I want to have a chance to reach out to some of these guys because I think I know who some of them are. And he said, I just want to make sure that they're not, blindsided or re-traumatized by this. So he started kind of asking around, and one by one, kind of between the two of us, I was talking to moms and aunts and uncles and siblings of young victims, and the 5 cases that we found became 6, and then 7, and then 10, and then 13. And so it was an amazing, astounding find, and we kept thinking, what have we discovered here? So then in May of 2014, Esme Murphy caught wind of the story on my blog. And this is when things really, really kind of hit the fan. My blog at that point, prior to her newscast, was about 100 views a day, and suddenly it was over 40,000 views a day. And so these are just some screenshots from that May 2014 news report by WCCO. And the one thing that I loved, and we both loved, was that Patty came on and said, what Jared and Joy are doing here is really important. And she really validated our efforts, and I was just so grateful because I was still kind of terrified of her at that time. And and it just felt really, really good. And it was really at that point that the 4 of us became a team.
It was amazing energy. It was, what year is it? It's 2014. So we were approaching 25 years since Jacob had been kidnapped, and I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't want to have a 25th anniversry. What do you do with that? You know, it's an opportunity to get Jacob's story out there, and now there were other victims, and my work with the National Center told me that, they have a cold case review, and I was trying to get them to come to Stearns County, but that didn't happen right away either. But suddenly, we were uncovering a lot, she was uncovering a lot, and Jared, and what was happening is that they were turning them all into Stearns County, but they had a person of interest, so they were not following some of these leads, which we would find out, we always found out when people weren't called back. They'd call us and say, you know, I talked to, you know, Jared, and I called it into the Stearns County Sheriff's again, but nobody came out here. So we knew that we were on our own, and we just kept meeting. Jerry and I picked up Jared one day, and we drove through Paynesville. It's chilling. And he would show us where all those locations were on the map. And then we went over to Joy's house for the first time and met her husband, Ross. And I sat in their living room and looked at the pictures of her kids on the walls, and the food smelled great, and the kitchen. I finally figured out she was normal. This person who was shaking up the world was just a really nice mom and person, and so we formed this coalition of Joy, Jared, Jerry, and I jokingly called it a blogger, a plumber, a chiropractor, and a mom. And we kept really kind of strategizing, who do we talk to next? How can we push this forward? Because, you know, my work with the center told me that you don't have pockets of boy victims like that unless they're all connected. So I knew, and I'd done law enforcement presentations and, you know, the victim impact thing, and then I'd go sit in the back of the room and listen to these investigators. So I had learned a lot at this point, and I knew we were on to it. It felt different. It felt very different. So we went to the sheriff. Jerry and I went down to the sheriff and said, you know, no offense, but we don't want a 25th anniversary. We need the team back. At the beginning, we had Stearns County Sheriff, our State Crime Bureau, BCA, the FBI, Tri-County Major Crime Unit, St. Joe PD. It was like big. And now, you know, we had a couple investigators who had been holding, you know, the reins on it for quite a while. And I said, we need a review. And the sheriff, to his credit, he called a meeting within about a week. And the head of the FBI, the bureau in Minneapolis, was there. Our local, I didn't know there was a local FBI in St. Cloud. Did you? They're everywhere. Just kidding. No, I didn't know, but they were there. The BCA was there. Our Stearns County investigators, they were all there, and the sheriff very graciously thanked everybody for coming, and he said, the reason we're all here is Patty's upset. Go ahead, Patty. And I'm like, okay then. So I did, you know, I had stats. I'd met kids who'd come home after long periods of time. J.C. Dugard, 17 and a half years, and she came home. I met Elizabeth Smart. I met all these kids who were out there, and we needed answers. Not just our family, but the entire state needed answers. And the cold case review people from the National Center called Stearns County, and somebody jokingly said, well, if you think you can do a better job, you come out here. So they did. They came out and they did a review. They saw Joy's map. They were very impressed. And the FBI also has a cold case team. It's called the Child Abduction Response Deployment, I think, CARD team. So they came out and they amped up everything that was going on. I can't remember. Do I keep going?
Yeah, so that's what was going on in 2015, and now suddenly they have this cold case review team on the job. And in the meantime, Patty invites me over, makes some chocolate chip cookies, and sits me down and said, what do you think about working on a book together? And I was less terrified, but kind of now terrified all over again, because I thought, good Lord, what? You know, I'm just a blogger and an advertising person. I don't know anything about writing a book. But I said, what I can do is help you get organized, though, you know, because she's got just so much stuff. And she told me that. She's just had lots of bins and bins of stuff. So she said, could you just come and pick up some of my stuff? And I said, well, sure. So it's just a darn good thing I had a Ford Explorer at the time because I filled the whole back of my car. This is just a small amount of the stuff. And I started kind of going through these boxes, and a lot of it was just, oh my gosh, it was just so much. And also going through all of their old VHS tapes. You know, back in the day, they would just hit the button for record, and I remember when I was converting all those to digital, I'd kind of be watching, and it was amazing to me, the stark before and after of their lives. You know, I'd be watching Knots Landing, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's this newscast update about Jacob's case, and then boom, we're back to Knots Landing or a Vikings game or something. And so it was just kind of, it was hard for me to go through all that and I was 43 at the time, so I was just Patty's age pretty much when Jacob was kidnapped and just a few years older. So that was really hard for me. And I did get it organized with a little help from my favorite place, the Container Store. And I put all these labels and all these fascinating items in these airtight, watertight containers because I was so worried about them getting destroyed either in my house or at Patty's house, so I wanted to preserve everything. But you'll notice, like, down in the bottom right corner there's a whole thing called treasures. And these were Jacob's homemade items, you know. These were his little journals from school and little cards that he had made for his parents and artwork. And it was just so, I mean, as a mom, it was just heartbreaking. And I so badly at this point wanted to help them find the answers. And the amount of trust that she was now, I mean, we had come a long way from the stalker talk, but I mean, now I'm going through phone logs and she's trusting me with all of these, you know, items from the case investigation itself. So I was just so incredibly grateful. And then kind of right in the middle of all this,
Yeah, they had a suspect in our case, and man, we'd heard this guy's name from the very beginning, but there was a handful of names. They couldn't rule him in, and they couldn't rule him out. He never dropped off the list, but suddenly they, when the FBI came, they had they revisited Jared's case and they revisited ours, and they reran some of Jared's clothing, and they found a cold hit to the guy who took Jared. The DNA was a direct match to this Danny Heinrich. But they couldn't charge him because the statute of limitations had run out, and it was like tear your hair out kind of stuff. But they did get enough for a search warrant, and looking for anything Jacob and anything Jared, and they did the search, and they didn't find anything on either Jacob or Jared, but they did find about 17 volumes of pornographic images of children, and so they arrested him on federal charges of child pornography, and we were told that there was, they were hoping that they would apply enough pressure that this guy would plead and, you know, talk and tell us, because we still all believe that it was the same guy that took Jacob. So, but I kept my brain and my heart were having this argument because he had let all of his other victims go. So I didn't want it to be Danny Heinrich, because then what happened to Jacob? You know what? I knew it could be no good ending, but this is where we were at. And then Joy, you know, Jerry and I had been through a lot of these over the 25 years. But Joy hadn't, and she was very nervous about having all our stuff. She returned all the treasures in case there was something in there that was significant. And I think after that weekend, Jerry and I went camping just to get away from the media, the trauma, and poor Joy had a lot of stuff to process.
yeah, so suddenly there was an awful lot of tips coming into me through my blog, and it just got overwhelming, and a lot of them were disturbing and scary, and I just thought, oh my gosh, this, you know, they were more comfortable talking to me than talking to law enforcement because they were also scared. So it just got to be a very trying time. But in the middle of that, and we're all still working full time, I might add. Patty by this time is the director of the sexual assault division at Minnesota Department of Health. Do I have that right?
Right.
And
chair of the board for the National Center. It was crazy. I think that was my solace, was to just stay busy. It was the only way I could deal with the craziness at home.
yeah, so Patty, again, not only working full-time for the Minnesota Department of Health, but was also the the board chair for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So she was going to Washington a lot and working, and so in the meantime, I'm just trying to muddle through with this book project and still trying to get things organized for her. So I'm taking the snippets and chunks of things that she's written over the years and trying to create a timeline and trying to, put some kind of structure to however we're going to write this story, doing whatever I can to actually, not write it, but to help her get going on it. And it took a lot of red wine, as you can see. But right in the middle of all of this.
Yeah. I picked myself up many times, but I was lost at this point in time. I'd been a searching mom for almost 27 years. Now who are you? I didn't know what to do with any of it. We planned the memorial. We planned a family burial. I'm blessed to have an amazing family. And everybody else went back to work, and I was lost. I really had nowhere to go. And I had been writing this book. It was another way of finding Jacob. It was just one more way of getting his story out there. And so at that point, I was done. I mean, what's the point? I was just done and pretty much lost.
And me too. I was also devastated, but at this point, I really didn't see us getting going on this book again. I didn't think this book would ever happen. And Patty would try to write a little bit, about her growing up years or things that were easier. I'd say, well, tell me more about your mom. Tell me more about living in St. Paul. So trying to pick easy topics, but it was just really hard. And so we quit. We quit for 2 years. So from 2016 to 2018, Patty was just in kind of survival mode, and it was really tough. And then I got a call. This is in October of 2018 from a friend of a friend, really, whose name was Rosie, and she said, Joy, you guys need to finish that book. This is really an important story to tell, and you guys need to get going again. And she said, I would really like to offer you, my husband and I would like to offer you our cabin to use as kind of a quiet retreat place where you can work, and you're invited, you can stay overnight, you can do whatever, but just please consider it. And we really want to see that book get written. So I brought it up to Patty, and she said, yeah. So we went, this is us, on the first day that we were at Rosie's cabin, and we didn't talk at all about the book that day, I don't think. We just kind of regrouped because we hadn't even really done much of that. We hadn't seen each other a lot in those couple of years. But we got going again, and then COVID happened, which was great for writing, because what else are you going to do? And so we thought we had a draft pretty well nailed down. We were really excited. We signed up for a class from the Madeline Island School of the Arts. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but it was great. It was held virtually because of COVID. So we rented a VRBO down in Winona and said, okay, we just got to finish the ending. This is going to be our spark. We're going to get really serious and put our noses to the grindstone, and we're going to crank out that last part of the book. And we had the opportunity to submit the first 50 pages to our instructor for feedback. And when we met with her, she said, yeah, this is really great, but she said, it's not the ending that you have to worry about, it's the beginning. She said, you cannot take 100 pages of your reader's time to get to the kidnapping. So it wasn't the advice or input we wanted to hear. In fact, we were quite mad and kind of wanted to kill her. But we had to start over. Yeah, it was tough. So that's what we did. We went literally back to the drawing board, and we had to re-plot out our whole structure and story map and try to figure out how to move things along. And at its most unwieldy, I can tell you that a memoir normally is about 100,000 words, and at its most unwieldy, it was probably 250,000 words. So we had like 2.5 books by the time we finally started editing it down.
27 years is a long time. How do you cut any of it? Yeah, this is at Joy's house. We really did work hard.
So we finally got a draft together, and it was still too long at this point, but we had recruited some beta readers. When we were at the Madeline Island retreat, whatever, in Winona, we met some other people, some other writers online, and we met with them every day online, and we just really connected, and we decided to get together as a group after and to continue as our own little private writing group, and every other week we would meet on Wednesdays, and they would help us along, and to this day we still meet with them. It was just an amazing find. We were so blessed to be able to find them when we did. So this is us going through our first draft. We eventually found an agent and we submitted it, and then she helped us find a publisher, and we were incredibly fortunate to be able to get our book published through the Minnesota Historical Society Press. And maybe you want to...
That was a journey too, because we had several offers from these true crime people. And they were all sensationalized, and that wasn't why we wrote it, and that's not what we wanted, the tone that we were looking for. So we were really thrilled to have it be. Jacob changed Minnesota history, changed the way we all functioned, and we were really happy. They've been very good to us.
Well, and it was so important to me too to have this book written, to have it be Patty's book in her words and her journey, because as we all know sitting in this room, it is her that was something about Patty and her 5-foot stature, but her little bulldog of a mom, biggest mama bear, and I think as a whole state, we can just be so proud of her for what she did for keeping all of our kids safe. And so I'm just so very fortunate and blessed that she was trusting enough of me, an unpublished author, just trying to write a blog, who asked me to partner with her in this.
And we're friends now, if you haven't figured out. Thank you. Turns out we're both Vikings fans. Talk about hope. We hope every year.
This was another working day out at my house. We were going through a draft or edits or something, and that was against the Buffalo Bills when Justin Jefferson caught that amazing pass on 4th and 18, and we thought for sure it was our year, and it wasn't again.
Yet. We will have
yet.
So yeah, we got it published, and we are really, really grateful to the people in this community for, what we've learned along the way is everybody has a story. So many people have a story of losing a child to cancer or accidents or suicide or, just not even always a child, but a journey story. And people have been very generous about sharing those stories and finding some hope in our journey to help them find a path through dark times. And I feel like I learned this through my Team Hope parents. We're stronger together, and you're never alone if you're willing to accept, to look for, and let people come in to help you. So it's been a phenomenal experience just getting out and hearing the stories and being there for one another.
I think also as Minnesotans, this was tough for us to get through. And after Jacob was found, there was this amazing movement, this 11 for Jacob movement. And Patty, you should explain, but this is exactly, I think, what we all needed just to pull ourselves off the ground.
We had left the hearing where we heard the horrific ending to Jacob's story, and Allison, who runs the Jacob Wetterling Foundation, are still out there strong and doing prevention messages, and she got a text from a friend of ours at the National Center who said he knew that Jacob was wearing his soccer jersey, number 11, and he wanted to put an 11 on his cheek, and the entire team they were going to put 11 on their cheeks for a soccer game in Alexandria, Virginia, where the National Center is, and he wanted to honor Jacob. And they asked our permission, and Jerry, it gives me goosebumps to this day, this child just wanting to honor Jacob at this point in time. And Allison thought, so we said yes, and she thought, well, it'd be really nice if it stood for something. So she went through all of the talk. She's heard me talk a million times, and did we describe Jacob? And it was these 11. Be fair, be kind, be understanding, be honest, be thankful, be a good sport, be a good friend, be joyful, be generous, be gentle with others, and be positive. It started small. We put those 11 up. The Minnesota Twins wanted to wear an 11 on their jersey. The Wild, Zach Parisi was number 11 when he played for the Wild. They did an event. Schools sent the students, have a cup of coffee on me. Kindness is real. Or goes viral. It was so amazing that 35W Bridge was lit blue, Jacob's favorite color, for 11 days. All of the major sports covered it, and kids sent pictures and notes, and we have a video, but I don't think it's going to play either.
No, that's okay. We won't do the video. We want to leave plenty of time for questions, but
I just wanted to say that that's what it's all about. We were fighting to bring Jacob home, and we did find him, but we were also fighting for the world that Jacob knew and believed in, and it's a world that I still believe today. If we taught our children to abide by those 11 things, we would be raising good, upstanding citizens who would never harm another. We talk to kids about don't do this, don't share pictures online, don't do that, but we're not telling them and showing them how to be kind, be thoughtful, be generous. That's to me the message that I learn from kids every time I talk to kids. That's why I love the messages on the door here, and the kindness is the real deal right outside the door. So I think that's the world that I believe in, and it's still worth fighting for. So we do have time, I think, for questions.
did you want to tell Finn's story?
Oh.
I love Finn's story.
So I have Jerry and I have 6 grandchildren now. That each of our girls has 2 girls, and Trevor has 2 boys, Jake and Finn. Jake is 15 and he's taller than Jerry. You can see him in the back. We get together every summer with the whole crew, and all the cousins get to play and have fun. I'm so proud of the way these kids have built happiness and joy into their lives. But Finn, who's the little guy in the front, last year, Jerry and I were they live in Colorado, and Jerry and I went out to visit for Christmas, and Finn wanted us to take him shopping to buy something for his parents. And so we went to a Super Target, got a cart, and we walked up and down every row. Mom was easy, because she's surrounded by all these guys, so she likes anything girly. Perfume, scarves, lotion, candles, she was easy. But Trevor, he didn't know what to buy his dad. So we walked up and down, and finally he put something in the cart. And I just looked at him and said, Finn, is that what you want to give your dad for Christmas? And he looked at me straight in the eye and he just said, it's a possibility. He's 9. So we walked through that giant Target, down every aisle, and we filled that cart with possibilities. Honestly, he changed my life. It makes me cry that day, because I want to live like that. I want to fill my cart with possibilities. We owe it to our children to have possibility thinking, and the world is out there, and it can be good and kind. There's way more good people in the world than bad, and it really is up to us to fight for that world and build it. So eventually he chose one gift, and we had to run around putting everything else back. But I think of that every single day. For as long as I live on this planet, I'm going to fill my cart with possibilities, and I encourage all of you to join me. It feels so wonderful.